everyone, it's Alexa with the Colby Farms and welcome to my channel. Today we are going to be making a sourdough galette. And the fruit that I'm going to be using is raspberries. It is getting very close to Valentine's Day and I love to make this dessert treat for my husband. He just loves raspberries and galettes seem to be his favorite every time. So it's a pretty simple recipe. It does take a little bit because you gotta let the sourdough ferment, but we'll get there in a second. But first, since I'm gonna be working with dough, I'm gonna take off my ring. All right, I'm back and we're ready to go. So a galette is a pastry. It is kind of like a pie, but not so much so. It's about the same amount of work as a pie, but it's just laid differently. It's more of a, you don't have to make your galettes as sweet as pies usually are. And you obviously don't have to use as much dough either. With a galette, you're gonna see that it's gonna fold over onto the sides and make like a beautiful wreath looking dessert. You're gonna fit in the middle, you're gonna fill it with some berries. I like to do peaches, I've done apples. You can do any sort of fruit. You can make a chocolate galette, you can make a vanilla custard galette, whatever you prefer. We love to use fruit in this because fruit is a little bit more healthier and also it's still pretty sweet and it's just delicious. It's a beautiful treat to have right after dinner. So we're gonna make the dough first, okay? So first I'm going to need 2 cups of flour. It's almost gonna be like you're making homemade biscuits and you'll see why in a second. So just level it out. I'm using all-purpose unbleached flour. Okay. And then next, you're going to need 1 cup of butter. So 1 cup of butter is 2 sticks, if you did not know. I am going to shred my butter into my flour mixture. That in itself is going to help break up that butter and evenly coat it around with the flour. I have chopped up butter in the past. 1, it makes more dishes. 2, it makes bigger chunks, so then I still have to go into those chunks and break them down anyways into the flour. And 3, it's just easier. So it's easier than sitting there and chopping away, so I highly recommend shredding your butter into your flour. You want to make sure to get all the butter out. Sometimes it could be stuck to the inside of your cheese grater. So go ahead and get all that. And then you can use a pastry cutter or you can use your hands. I'm going to use my hands. I'm going to be feeding my family. And honestly, your hands are the best tools in the kitchen. So I'm just going to take my flour, bring it over the butter, and start working the butter into the dough. You want to make sure you're working that real good. Okay? Get all the big clumps, break it all up. That way there isn't like a huge chunk of butter when you go to lay out your dough. That seems good. So we have our aprons to be able to wipe off. Okay, next I'm gonna add 1 teaspoon of salt. So I have some chunky sea salt here that I'm gonna mortar down. Okay. I'm gonna do 1 teaspoon of salt. Then next I'm going to add some honey. Put this off to the side. I'm gonna add 2 tablespoons of honey. You can also use sugar if you would prefer. We like to use honey in this house as a sweetener. Less processed. We get this honey from a local farmer. Get pretty messy real quick when you're making a pastry. Okay, and the last but not least, we are going to be adding 1 cup of sourdough starter. Okay. So this starter of mine has been sitting in the fridge. I usually feed it once a week, and then after I feed it, I let it sit out for a little bit, and then I'll put it in the fridge. And then when I pull it out of the fridge, it's good and ready to go, nice and fermented. So this has been sitting in the fridge, and you do want a cold starter because the cold starter helps with the pastry. If you have a starter that's at room temperature, that's okay, especially in these winter months, but when you get into the summertime and it's warm in your house, and you have a warm bubbly starter, it'll be okay, but it's gonna melt that butter. And you really don't want that butter to melt. You want it to just form into the flour. So make sure your starter is cold when you go and make this pastry. Make sure to get all the starter out. All right, I'm gonna set that off to the side. And then we're going to stir it. This is going to be the fun, hard part. So you really want to stir it all around real good. And you're gonna think to yourself, this is not gonna come together. It's gonna come together, I promise you. We don't need to add any water, we don't need to add any milk. Just be patient and it will all come together. If you have one of these and a flimsy one, that's the best. Go ahead and use it. Scrape this all off. And now we're going to use the greatest tool in the kitchen. That's our hands. Whenever you're using your hands to mix the dough, whatever dough you have, always just use one hand. Using one hand helps free this hand. That way it can hold down your bowl, but also it can, you know, when you lift your hand up and you've got dough all over it, you don't have dough over both hands, and then you're touching everything and then you get flour and dough everywhere. It's not a fun cleanup, my friends. I've been there. So I always recommend trying to use one hand if you can. Okay, just really work that in there. Guys, believe that January is literally almost over. I cannot even believe it. I cannot even believe that it is almost over. It's crazy to me. Okay. Voila, we got a little bit out here. Stick that in there. Okay, and look. Our pastry dough has formed together. Okay. So, since it's a sourdough, I'm gonna let it ferment for about 8 to 12 hours. To do that, you can just put some plastic wrap over it. You can put a towel over it, although air can seep in, so I do recommend plastic wrap. Or if you would like to save this for actually Valentine's Day, you can go ahead, take this dough, wrap it up in some plastic wrap, and place it in the freezer. That way you can just get it out, let it unthaw, and it's ready to go for that day, okay? Put this over. I have my Galette dough that I made last night, and it is all ready to go. So we're gonna put this off to the side as we make our filling real quick. So, like I said, we are making a sourdough raspberry galette. These raspberries have been in the freezer for a little while. We are going to be making the filling. These have unthawed. You wanna make sure of that. So we're gonna make the filling. The filling is fairly simple. It's just gonna be raspberries, and then we're gonna add 2 tablespoons of honey. Then we are going to add 1 teaspoon of arrowroot powder. You could add 1 teaspoon of cornstarch, same thing. So, but I like to use arrowroot powder in my kitchen. Okay, so we're going to get a separate spoon. I'm going to use this one. I'm going to stir it all around. Now you want to make sure all of the honey coats all of the raspberries, okay? Especially if they're frozen, they're going to look a little mushy, that's okay. Let me know in the comments below if you've ever had a galette before, let alone sourdough. I made this, I believe it's 2 years to this month, and it has been by far one of my favorite dessert recipes. Okay, so that's all good and ready to go. Now, before we start this, you want to make sure that you turn your oven on to 350. My oven has been heating up and it's pretty much almost ready to go. So I'm going to get my dough out and I'm going to lay it on the surface. You can lay a little bit of flour down, that way it doesn't stick. You could lay this on parchment paper. I am not the best with parchment paper, so I will just usually put it on my counter and transport it to the parchment paper. That's not always the safest option because things can fall apart, but it works for me. So spread out my flour a little bit. Don't want to get too much and dry it out. Okay, so. All right. You're going to want to work this dough just a little bit. It's a pastry, okay? It can, if you work it too much, it'll start to get dry and fall apart. But I really want to work this butter into it. Cooking from scratch is not for the faint of heart. Including all of the benefits from cooking from scratch, it is a lot of work. So just keep telling yourself that you're doing this out of love. That's what I do. I find cooking to be more enjoyable when I actually make it into my art. So let cooking be your art. Okay, so I can feel the butter starting to get soft. When it starts to get really, you can start to feel it on your hands. That means you're working the butter into it, okay? And you don't want to work it too much because then that butter will melt and it could get really messy really quick and really sticky. So you're gonna need a rolling pin. Okay? And I am going to flour my rolling pin just a little bit. Okay. Now, this part, you want to make sure that you're taking your time. Don't go quick, okay? You don't want the pastry to split apart. If it does, I'll show you what to do to fix it. Just go ahead and take your time. So you're gonna see that the pastry is starting to stick to the rolling pin, okay? I'm just gonna put a tad more flour on because I don't want it to stick too much. Roll that pastry dough right back on top. Remember, I am not a chef, I am not a professional, I am a home cook. I have been cooking for most of my life, but I've really tuned into cooking from scratch for the past 3 years. This is what works for me in my kitchen, and hopefully I'll be able to help you teach you, you know? At the end of the day, what matters is that we got a meal on the table for our family. And what also matters to me is that the meal that I provided was the most nutritious for them. So if that's you as well, I'm glad you're here. Okay, just gonna keep rolling. You want it to be a little bit thinner, probably about 1/4 to 1/2 inch thick. Okay. And it can be a perfect circle. It's not gonna be in this house. It's beautiful the way it is. See how it ripped up like that? All right, gotta be careful. All right, to me, that's good enough. Okay, so maybe a little bit more. All right, to me, that's good enough. So I'm gonna go ahead and take my filling and I'm gonna pour it into the middle of the galette. Raspberries have such a beautiful color. I mean, they bring to life literally any dish. Raspberries are also my husband's favorite fruit. So I just love making this dessert. It just makes him so happy, you know. He's a very simple man. He doesn't ask for a lot. But man, when I make this dessert, he is just stoked. He is so excited for it. Okay, so I made a nice little circle. You don't want it to go too far over. I like to leave, probably 2 to 3 inches from the edge open, okay? Because we're gonna fold the galette over and you're gonna see. Okay, so we have spread out our entire galette. Remember, 2 to 3 inches. I would say more 3 inches to be on the safe side. And now we are going to start folding the edges over, okay? Just takes a little bit. I like to go around the entire galette. Remember, take your time with this, especially if you didn't use parchment paper. So, fold this edge over, and then you just kind of keep doing like a folding motion. You can make it any design that you want, whatever you prefer. This is the easiest for my family. That's what I'm doing. Okay. Regardless, it's gonna turn out delicious. Okay, so we have our galette. All right, so now we are going to transport it to some parchment paper. I like to crease the sides to help it from moving so much, okay? So this part, if you didn't use parchment paper, it's gonna be really trying, so just take your time, okay? It's gonna be sticking to the counter a little bit. Make sure we're just moving. sure if you're using a spatula, if you're using a pastry cutter, that it is pointed down and up. I guess this is one of the scenarios where you choose your heart. You can either work with the parchment paper, which can be a pain, or you can transport the pastry, which could, if you're not careful, fall apart. So just make sure that you're paying attention at all times. Okay, so to give it that nice, beautiful golden look on top, we're gonna pour some milk into a little cup, and then I'm gonna brush the milk along the pastry, okay? Brush out, just gonna gently brush. Then I have some sugar. We're also going to sprinkle some sugar on top. It's just going to give it a beautiful glow and a little bit of a sweeter taste if you prefer. This is organic cane sugar that I used. You can use whatever sugar you prefer. Maple sugar would work phenomenal on top of this. Okay. All right, our oven is hot. It's nice and ready. So we are going to place it in the oven for about 35 to 40 minutes. I'm going to put it in the middle of the oven, and so don't put it too high and don't put it too low. Every oven is different, so make sure you are thoroughly watching your pastry dish. I know when I came from here compared to our last home, the ovens here worked much differently, much quicker, and so I had to lessen the time. So just make sure that you're paying attention to that when you put it in, okay? And there you have it. We have our sourdough raspberry galette. It looks delicious. It smells so good. The pastry rose very nicely. We are also excited to dig into it. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut it, and then we're gonna enjoy it, okay? And I hope you enjoy it as well. If you decide to make this, go ahead and comment below. Let me know how you liked it. If you use a different filling, go ahead and let me know as well. I'm always interested in making different galettes. So thank you so much for watching. We are so glad to have you. Go ahead and hit the like button and hit subscribe, and hit that little bell off to the side so you'll be updated whenever we post a video here on the Colby Farms. Thank you so much for stopping by the farm, and we'll see you next time. Bye. Don't fret. Let's see. Those berries are tart.